This is a test of the sound. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is Karen Ainsley at the Indiana State Library, and we should all be here for the budget part of the budget workshop. We have the Department of Local Government Finance here. We have two people speaking today. We're going to start with Fred Van Dorp. And for you who aren't familiar with Fred, he became the director of the budget division in 2017, but he's been around the state for a while. But before that, he had spent some time in Washington, D.C., but he did come back, and we're glad he's here with us today, and he's going to present the budget overview. Fred?
Good morning. Good morning. All right. Favorite part of any presentation is that opening salvo, right, where I say good morning, you guys say good morning, and no matter how loud you are the first time, I say, we can do better than that. And then I say good morning again, and then with enthusiasm, you guys respond. So let's try this again. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. That is much better. That will never get old to me.
I'm going to change it so you don't see the next slide. Is that a problem for you?
No.
It's just because that's what goes out to them.
Okay.
So we're going to display settings, and we're just going to swap.
Perfect.
Okay. And now you probably can use, yeah.
Perfect.
Now you're set.
Okay, so happy to be here. I got a chance to see Dan Jones and Ryan give this presentation last year, and I thought this is a very good way for us to get our message out to a number of people all in one fell swoop. Last week I was in South Bend giving a very similar presentation to the clerk treasurers. That meant presentation started at 9 a.m. I left Indianapolis just after 3 to make it up there. So this is a much shorter commute and going to be much easier on the recovery time. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for having us. That is, the budgeting cycle is difficult for any number of reasons, but partially because we only see it once per year. Over the last few months, I've begun to think about the calendar year from the department's perspective into 3 separate stages. We've got the preseason, which is effectively from the time that we certify one budget to the time that we begin the process again. So preseason is looking at February 15th through about July 15th. There we switch from the preseason to the workshop season, where the field reps will be going out, meeting with you individually, or meeting with you within your counties, helping you to actually compile the budgets. And in my head, I see that running from July 15th through August 30th this year. And from there, we transition to the actual budget season itself, where we're actually crunching the numbers and certifying the budgets. The timing on this particular presentation is just about perfect. It gives us a chance to ease ourselves back into the budgeting process. Now, I'm certain that a number of you have already started the process, but presentations like this one make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of due dates, expectations, changes to the process, and any updates that the department is able to share with you. So the timing on this one really couldn't have been better. Now, before we get started, I want to try to do something that I did in South Bend. I need to try to find 2 people. I'm interested in which person, either in the room or joining us online, has gone through the most budget seasons, and I'm interested in finding the other end of the spectrum as well as the most recent addition to the team. So, by show of hands, has anybody gone through 10 or more budget seasons? Okay, hands went right up. About 15. Keep them up. 20? 25. 25, I see 25, 25, 26.
We got 4 people out there with 25.
Yeah, 25, all right. So for those folks playing along at home, and do I see 30? 30 plus. 42. Is anyone going to top Norma Fink at 42? No. Okay. All right. So, Norma, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had, I'm sorry. So that's the high end. So let's see if we can let's see if we can find the other end. 5 or less. 4, 3, 2, 1.
0.
0. All right. So 6 months.
I started at the end of January, so I'm at 5.
5 months.
We have somebody younger out there who's just started yesterday.
Started yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So we've got Norma and Emily Fox. Norma, do you have any advice for Emily? Oh, she's still typing. She's still typing.
Ask other librarians for help.
Fantastic advice. I imagine that goes for everyone. I mean, like I said, the budgeting cycle it's difficult, it's complicated, and I can guarantee you that it gets easier. But the first time is going to be a little bit harder. Second time is still going to be a little bit rough. But by the time you get through your 42nd one, it's a piece of cake. Okay. All right, Norma, thank you. All right. So what we're looking at here. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's two things I want to do before I jump right into this one. On my right, I've got Ryan Burke. In the back of the classroom, we have got Wayne Hudson. These are my security guards for today. Dan Jones warned me that this could be a pretty rowdy crowd, so I wanted to make sure I brought plenty of support. The department this year has been making a real effort to make sure that at every presentation that we are giving, every workshop that we're going on, that we're inviting as many field reps as we can bring into the room. It's important that you guys see them. It's important that they see you. And it helps the department so that you guys can hear exactly what we are telling them. They can hear exactly what we are telling you. And so when I volunteer them to be that resource for you, to let you know that they're available to you to ask questions, they know exactly what it is we're signing them up for. And so you'll hear me refer to it a number of times during the course of the presentation, and in fact the last two slides contain the contact information for the budget field staff. They are the best resource that the department provides, as fantastic as I think I am sometimes. They will be your point of contact. They'll be your primary, and I will volunteer them to provide the service that they'll either be able to answer your question or route it to someone who can. So I like to think of them as your primary point of contact, your introduction to all things state related. And if they can answer it, they will. Otherwise, they may need to route you to the state auditor's office or to State Board of Accounts. But give the field rep the first bite at the apple. The second thing. I had a second thing. It'll come back to me later. All right, so and that's it. So between Ryan and I, we have got 2 hours worth of talking that we can do. And once I get going, I can get you 2 hours on my own. But what we saw at the Library Federation's presentation just a few months ago is that this is better if it is as interactive as you'd like it to be. If you've got questions, if you'd like to stay on a topic longer, we can absolutely do deep dives into any number of subjects. And while we're all here together, both in the room and online, if you guys want us to stick on a particular subject, just let us know. Whether that is, whether or not you want to raise your hand or just shout out, we can spend as much time as we need to on any particular subject that we'll be covering today, or clearing up any misconceptions, or just talking about what the year looks like. If we can be helpful, let's do that. If you don't, you'll get a steady diet of us talking at you, but if you guys are feeling so bold, let us know. Wayne is in the back taking down questions. Karen will be answering questions in real time. Once we're done, we'll end up sort of compiling those questions and putting together an FAQ that we'll post on our website, and also distribute to the field staff, so that if we don't get you the answer to the question that we ultimately need, we'll have your field rep reach out to have that conversation with you one-on-one to clear up any number of details that we can provide. Last thing, the gal in the back, sitting like this, I'm trusting you that if I start to go soft, to let me know. If my head goes down, I get a feeling I won't be projecting all the way to the back of the room. If you can't hear me, let me know. Okay. So we've got I'll be on the table of contents that we're looking at here. We've got 5 different bullets, but we need to make a slight adjustment. Number 4 and number 5 need to be pulled off of those one. Although we'll touch on the estimate reports that the department will be releasing, there's just not quite enough time to get into a deep dive in each one of those, unless that is what the audience wants. And then number 5 there, that's labeled HEA 1009 and HEA 1167, don't impact libraries directly. if time allows, we'll touch on some of the changes that schools are seeing, just so that you have an idea of what's happening within your communities, even if it's not directly impacting what you're going to see from a budgeting standpoint. Now, 1, 2, and 3 are still viable, so we're gonna jump into that. That's where we're going to get started today. That is the budget calendar. Now, what we're looking at here is an excerpt of the budget calendar that the department released a couple months ago. We'll go through this relatively quickly. We've tried to customize this to some of the key points, and so that first paragraph at the top that discusses that there's a full version of this calendar available will contain things that we're not looking at that may be very specific to cities and towns or to counties only. The first 3 on the list are not library specific, but we're going to touch on the CNAV, or the Certified Net Assessed Value process, a couple times during this presentation. It's largely a responsibility of the county auditor to certify those AVs to us, but want to at least start to lay the groundwork for presentations that the department will be doing next year and into the future, discussing how those, or really getting into how those certified AVs impact the budgeting process as a whole. But the first 3, the annexation report, TIF neutralization, and the TIF access memo, are not requirements for the library, but are prerequisites to the CNAV certification process that your county auditor is going through. The one that's labeled May 31st is the deadline for the state budget agency to provide the first set of 2019 local income tax estimates. Now, when we put that calendar out, we couldn't have known that we'd be doing 3 distributions within the month of May relating to income tax. The one that's labeled here is not the supplement, is not the one-time distribution, but it's the first round of estimates for the 2019. So we're looking into the future of what you're going to end up receiving. We will later in the calendar, we will look at when the budget agency actually certifies the final figures, but this gives us a sense of where we are as of May 31st. Okay. June 30th, very important day for all units. Statutorily, that is when the county auditor is required to have made their distributions for the spring settlement. Everyone should receive that first check before June 30th. Now, there are 2 separate things going on July 2nd. The one in the middle here is also relating to the CNAV certification process. That's when your assessor is going to be rolling real and personal property values. Again, not something that the libraries are required to participate in, but it gives you a sense of one of the other things that's going on at the same time that you are working on your budgets. The big one on this particular slide, or the more important activity that's going to happen on July 2nd, is when the state budget agency releases the AVGQ, the assessed value growth quotient, which is a huge puzzle piece for the department. Once we have the assessed value growth quotient, we can start to release more of the department can release more of its reports. Most importantly, the estimated max levy report. Before July 2nd, we can come up with an estimate. We can assume what that value is, but armed with the AVGQ, we're able to finalize that report, and we'll be able to get that posted to give you a sense of what your maximum levy will be in the upcoming budgeting cycle. There are a number of other reports that we'll ultimately end up releasing and posting on our website. The CUME fund, the debt service reports we will make available to you, but the big one that we'll end up releasing is the max levy estimate. Both June and July are very calculation-heavy months for the department, putting together the prereqs as we transition from the budget preseason to the workshop season itself, giving you those dollars, giving you those estimates, so that you can begin to work on your budgets with real values. Another one of the reports that we'll be releasing is the miscellaneous revenue estimates. We will be using the information provided by the state auditor's office to be able to provide a unit level breakdown of the various distributions that we think you'll be receiving for the last 6 months of the year and the 12 months of the following. July 16th, the budget workshops start. 10 of the 12 field reps will be going out on July 16th. It's definitely earlier than we went out last year, or as a group, on average, it's earlier than we went out last year. You'll see by the time we get to the last slide here, or the last slide in this particular subject, of why we made the decision to start this process earlier than we had in the past. Okay. July 31st, the department will be releasing July 31st is the statutory deadline for the department to release its circuit breaker estimates. This will be the third year that we have released those estimates. Now, these are not to be confused with the 2018 actual circuit breaker amounts that we released 3 months ago, but these are the projections for what we think the circuit breakers will do next year. Like I said, this will be the third year that we've released them, and I think we've made some pretty remarkable strides in those 3 years to figure out how closely we can get those estimates to being the actuals. The first year we released them, we were about 41% higher than they actually came in. Last year, that number dropped to about 16%. So the information that you're providing during your pre-budget worksheets, that information is helping us to provide cleaner estimates than we have in the past. Now, getting to zero or being able to guess what the actual circuit breaker is going to be 9 months in advance, we won't always hit them exactly, but we're feeling better and better about how our estimates match up with the actuals year after year. Okay. So August 1st is the date that I've been working toward. So we've looked at the prerequisites. August 1st is the day that the county auditor should be certifying their assessed values to the department, making that information available to both the department and to the local units within their community. When you picture your budget order, there are 4 values that we're ultimately returning to you: the levy, the budget, the rate. But included on that certified budget order is also the assessed value, which means that this August 1st date is the first date that we're able to actually begin to collect the information that will actually appear on the budget order itself. Today, I just want to introduce that as a footnote. As we go forward, we'll be looking at how the growth within your community, as reflected in your assessed value, ultimately has long-reaching effects on the various levies, the circuit breaker numbers, the rates that you'll ultimately be providing. So today it's a footnote, but going forward, we'll definitely start looking at how we can, we'll definitely be looking at ways that we can make that assessed value information available to you and use that to help sort of dictate the decisions that you're making relating to the other rates and amounts that you're ultimately certifying, that you'll ultimately be using during your budgeting cycle. All right. September 3rd is an important date for those units with appointed boards. That's the last day to submit your proposed budgets. Although you won't ultimately be the one adopting it, there are responsibilities that the binding units have, or that these type of units have, to make sure that that information is available to the body that will ultimately be adopting it. The next slide we're going to do slightly out of order. And so where this calendar is laid out chronologically, I do want to kind of switch these around a little bit. October 19th, last day to file excess levy appeals. The last day to file, not the only day to file. Would encourage anyone who is considering applying for appeal to submit sooner, but wanted to point out when the last day to actually adopt, or actually to submit those appeals to the department would be. Now, switching gears, we know that during the budgeting process, the process is air-gapped. We can't do it all in one day, and statute requires a certain number of days in between different places where action needs to be taken. October 12th, October 22nd, and then we'll see on the next slide of November 1st become 3 key dates in outlining when the notice to taxpayers needs to go out, the last possible day to hold a public hearing, and then the last day to actually adopt a budget. So on October 12th, the budget form 3 needs to be uploaded into Gateway. So the notice to taxpayers letting them know when the public hearing is scheduled for. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. if you're going to take action on the last day, October 12th is the day that's very important that everybody should sort of keep on their radars. If you haven't taken action by October 12th, if the Form 3 isn't posted by October 12th, based on the amount of time that is required between these various stages in the process, you won't be able to adopt on the last day. Okay, so October 22nd is the last day to hold the public hearing. After the public hearing on October 22nd, the taxpayers would have 7 days to file an objection to that particular budget. This slide will also do slightly out of order. Again, sticking with that 10-day theme that we saw, November 1st becomes the deadline for all taxing units to adopt their budget. And then our request is that within 2 days of adoption that the budgets be uploaded into Gateway. Now, there are more than 2 days between November 1st and November 5th. That's because November 3rd falls on a weekend. And so where we see November 5th here, it is 48 hours after the adoption and then the first business day following that day. So November 5th is the last day in which you'll be loading your information into Gateway. Okay. The first and the fourth bullets here, October 31st is when the state budget agency will actually be certifying your lit distributions. Last year, there were 25 counties that took action in October to either increase or decrease or reallocate their local income tax, which meant that the estimates that were released earlier in the year were ultimately updated and modified for these communities. On October 31st, or when the department releases the updated lit figures on November 1st, you'll see exactly we will have certified the exact number of dollars that will be distributed during 2019 from that are generated from the local income tax. The last date on the last date on the calendar I'd like to talk about is December 14th. And so what that is the last day for a unit to submit an additional appropriation to the department, knowing that that additional appropriation will be approved before December 31st. And so although December 14th doesn't exist in statute, where that date comes from is the department has 15 days to review and approve any submitted additional appropriations. On the 14th would give us those 15 days to be able to respond to you. Now, what we've historically seen is additional appropriations will come in all the way through the end of the year, and where possible, we will be reviewing and approving those where we can. But if an additional appropriation is in before December 14th, it's a guarantee that the department will have it reviewed, approved, and reviewed and returned to you before December 31st. Okay, so that is a lot of information to cover. We're 6 months in a blink of an eye, and it is information that many of you have seen and heard before. And so if you have the question of why bring it up again, why go through the calendar, this is that slide, or this is the reason why I wanted to go through the budget calendar the way that we did. December 31st is the new deadline for the department to certify 2,500 budgets statewide. Historically, we had until February 15th. This year, that date switches from February 15th through December 31st. Now, there are a couple caveats that would extend that certification deadline to January 15th, but by and large, what the department is working on is making sure we're able to get through this process by December 31st. Now, for those of you keeping track at home, that is 6 weeks, 6 fewer weeks that the department will be working with to, that's 6 fewer weeks for the department to be, 6 fewer weeks for the department to certify the same number of budgets. There hasn't been a change on your deadlines. These are very similar, I mean, barring the way the weekends fall. You are still working on the same timetables that you have in the past. It's just 45 days from the department. It was Commissioner Bennett pointed out that 45 days, 6 weeks that is per person. The math on that works out to, when we consider the impacts across 12 field reps, we're looking at about 4,050 work hours fewer to get through the same process. Now, the good news is that means that everyone in this room will start on January 1st with your budget for the year. And so it's not as if you're a couple months into your spending before you finally, before you'll see your certified budget. You'll start on January 1 knowing what it is, knowing exactly what the department is certified for your budget. The bad news is that's going to put a little bit of pressure on the department. So part of the reason why we're looking at the calendar is that this is very much the elephant in the room for us. This is what's governing most of our decisions. If you have got the impression that the field reps are asking for things sooner, if we are changing our timetable so that we are looking and requesting information earlier than we have in the past, this is where that is coming from. What we're ultimately trying to do is take care of the things that we can while we still have time, and then knowing that the tail end of this year is largely going to be devoted towards trying to get through the same process in a much shorter timetable. Now, if I had not given up sleeping months ago, this would keep me up at night. But I have, what the department is looking at this on a pass or fail scale. Either we're going to successfully move everybody through this process, or we'll have to figure out other ways that we can other ways that we can meet this new statutory deadline. Now, internally, we're doing a number of things to try to take the pressure off of, or to put ourselves in the position where December 31st is as realistic as it can be. Whether it is trying to recognize better hardware or software, the tools that we're using, the techniques that we're using to review the budgets, finding out if there are ways that we can streamline it, are things that we're looking at internally. We are looking at mobilizing more of the department's staff during the later part of the year to participate in the reviewing and the budgeting standpoint. We'll be doing a lot of things internally to try to make December 31st as realistic as possible. But there's this comes with a request. Knowing that standing pat isn't an option. We can do all the same things that we did last year, and we're not going to make it to December 31st. This comes with a request. One of the weaknesses on the calendar that we just looked at is that it's largely focused on statutory due dates. And that's not going to change. We want to make sure that you understand that you have until November 1st, or that you have until September 3rd. Your due dates haven't changed, but the request here is that where possible, to consider starting your budgeting process earlier than you have in the past. Whether it's a week, whether it is a month, if it makes sense, if you have the information that you need to go through the budgeting cycle, would encourage you to go through it. Any number of units that we're able to take care of before the deadline will take pressure off of the logjam that we're going to see of the units that won't be able to take action until later in the year. Now, again, you still have the same statutory due dates. The request here is just the consideration of, can we have our meeting sooner? Can we begin our discussion sooner? Can we submit earlier than we have in the past? For those folks where it is possible, it will take pressure off of the other units. It'll take pressure off of the department. And for those units that can't, you're still adopting well within the parameters outlined in statute. You still have the same time available to you.
We do have a question from the people out there at home. The question is, with the that deadline of December 31st, does that mean that 1782 notice is going to come earlier?
Yeah. So the certified date needs to be December 31st. If we factor back out the 10 days associated with the 1782 process, it means that the latest, forgive me, so I don't have a calendar in front of me, so forgive me for some rounding, it means that we have to have all the 1782s out by December 21st. And that would mean that the responses to the 1782s would have to come in. There are still a number of processes that the department would need to do on the last possible day for us to take action. But yeah, the short answer to that question is yes. All 1782s need to be out the door by December 21st.
Okay.
Okay, so since the last time the department gave this presentation, and I alluded to it earlier, we received, or a new commissioner was appointed to the department. I know many of you have had a chance to meet Commissioner Bennett, who has been traveling the state, meeting with local officials, getting a chance to introduce himself, get his name out there. He had spent 13 years as the clerk treasurer of the town of Plainfield, and so he's got a very strong sense of what of what he used to go through during the budgeting cycle. What he has encouraged us to do is to sort of implement best practices regardless of the unit. Where that manifests for this presentation is a county-specific calendar. So you got a chance to see what our calendar looked like, the calendar that we present to all units. Well, one of the things that we would encourage all units to do is to develop a unit-specific calendar. How am I going to get through the budgeting cycle? Where are my due dates? Where are my deadlines? When do I need to make my submissions? Where will I be collecting my information? When are my State Board of Accounts reports due? Or I keep bearing the lead, when is my workshop scheduled for? And what do I need to have created before that workshop starts? What will I need to do after that workshop? Are all things to consider. If you don't have if a unit hasn't considered one, the encouragement here is to create one. Outline what your next 6 months are going to look like, where you'll be collecting information from, when your statutory due dates are, how much time you'll need to do to create the various reports that you'll need to make this as successful as possible for yourself. Now, included on that calendar included with that calendar, not just the reports themselves, but taking it down to sort of one level further down. If I'm adopting my budget, when will I be adopting it? If there need to, the other people that will ultimately need to participate in that process, those folks will need to sign their name. Will we have a quorum on that day? When are the vacations scheduled for? Although it's a good practice, selfishly, I can tell you that we had a number of very uncomfortable conversations with folks who found themselves outside of the scheduled timetable. Once they're outside, there's not a lot of flexibility that the department has to allow for a meeting. Statute says it needs to be done by this time. If it isn't done by this time, it triggers a very specific response from the department. And so one of the things to keep in mind as you're developing this calendar is there enough time to restart it if anything were to go wrong? So as you are preparing for your workshops, it's something I'd ask you to consider. Not a requirement, not something you need to submit to us, but outlining what the next 2 weeks, the next 3 months, the next 6 months look like internally to make sure that you can get through the budgeting cycle on your end. Upcoming DLGF events, and Ryan's going to talk about these in more detail. For my money, the budget workshop is the best thing that the department offers, or is the most important service that the Department of Local Government Finance provides. We're looking at scheduling the workshops this year from July 16th through August 30th, although there'll still be the occasional revisit to a county to take care of some of the units that couldn't fit in on the front end. I know from the field reps that attendance at these workshops is phenomenal. Ryan will take us through, during Ryan's presentation, he'll take us through how to prepare for those workshops, what it is that you need to bring to them. Occasionally, and it's never libraries, but occasionally someone will show up at a workshop with a smile and a can-do attitude, but without the other forms that we need. Now, again, using the context of December 31st as sort of the elephant in the room, whether the field rep is scheduling a workshop appointment for 45 minutes or for 60 minutes, that's all the time that they are allotting. And although that is plenty of time to work through the process, if you have got questions or concerns, or if you want to make sure that you have everything that you need to get through or to make that appointment as productive as possible, would encourage you to reach out to the field reps before the workshop schedule, before your actual workshop. We still have about 2 weeks left on the preseason. Now is the time to have those conversations about what it means to put these reports together. If they've got recommendations for best practices, if you are very new to the process and they have got if you're very new to the process and they have ideas of areas in which can be improved based on last year or just common issues that they've run into, now is a very good time to have those conversations with the field staff. You'll still have your appointments, you'll still get a chance to meet with them, but it's a very short window. It's a very short window on the day of your actual workshop to try to get all of your questions answered. Field reps in some cases are doing up to 10 appointments in a single day, or normally top out about 8. Some do 10. So 10 appointments, and they're trying to stay on that schedule. It's not that they're trying to hurry. It's not that they're trying to hurry out. It's not that they're not there to provide that service or to help you through the process. It's that the other units there are a number of other units that are there for those same reasons. And if they're going to stay on my good side, right, or if they're going to keep these days, if they're going to schedule this many appointments, if they're going to get this many units through the process, you just know that time is going to be limited. The preseason, though, right now, they are all begging for things to do, looking for ways that they can assist you. Now's the time to have those sort of conversations. If you have any questions about something that you had heard last year or something that just didn't quite seem as clear as last year, now's the time to sort of begin now's the time to begin the pre-preparation for those workshops. Now, I wanted to state this last point is that during those workshops, the field reps can let you know what your resources are, what your timetables, your due dates. They can take you through best practices. They can help you through the process, but the one thing they can't do is provide financial advice. They can show you how to make the decision, but ultimately it'll fall on each one of you to say, I want it to be $100. I want to cut it down from what it was last year. Those are the decisions that they can't help you with. They can, again, let you know what your resources are, help you to identify where the department is posting information. They can take you to the statute, but that last step of letting you know whether or not they would prefer option A or option B is not a decision that is not an opinion that they should be providing. That ultimately comes from the local government. That is part of the local control part of it. All right. So, additional appropriations. Now, granted, libraries don't do a lot of additional appropriations, but I have given, at almost every presentation I've given this year, there have been some slides included relating to additional appropriations. It is very important for the department that we are able to sort of streamline this process. So knowing that we've got December 31st to worry about, last year there were many instances where we've got an additional appropriation in one hand and a budget to be certified in the other. What we're trying to do is reduce the total number of additional appropriations or streamline the additional appropriation process so that we can handle both of those. Where we had the extra 45 days or where we had until February 15th, it caused a problem, but it wasn't a deal breaker. Knowing that we've got two separate processes that we'll be trying to work through by December 31st, it's worth mentioning the additional appropriation process and some of the weaknesses that we see in it. Now, they are still going to be part of the process. They exist for a reason. That reason still exists, so they're not going anywhere, but wanted to sort of highlight what we see from an additional appropriation standpoint. What we see here is that the department has released 3 memos so far this year relating to additional appropriations. First one that just outlines the general process. The second one that does a deep dive into the actual state form itself, a line-by-line analysis of where the information is coming from, how the department reviews it, where you can find this information. And then the last one is the most recent version of the form itself. Okay, so statewide in 2017, the department approved just under 2,000 additional appropriations, with about 35% of those coming in the months of October, November, and December. Now, while it makes absolute sense that we would see more additional appropriations as you've begun to spend your appropriations down, this is what it is that we're trying to avoid, is the logjam of the highest number of additional appropriations coming in while we are working at trying to certify the budgets themselves. Now, separate from one additional appropriation, often they come in with multiple funds on them. So what we're looking at is just under 5,000 funds approved statewide on those 2,000 additional appropriations that we received. Now, what's not listed here is, good. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. So these are the numbers that we're looking at, and so knowing that we have got a change in our certification date coming up, what we're trying to do is draw attention to ways that we can improve this process. You know, specifically, there are 3 ways that we want to attack it: timely submissions, the implementation of a statewide form, and then the elimination of 2 common issues that we see with the additionals. Okay. From a timely submission standpoint, last year there were 165 additional appropriations. that had more than 100 days between the original advertisement and the time that they arrived in our office. Now, again, this is not a library-specific issue. There's one particular unit that is not as good at this as others, but what this is telling us is that someone will go through the entire process in July and then wait. And then they'll go through it in August and September, and then in November, they'll send all 6 or 8 additional appropriations that they have done during the course of the year to our office. The request here is if you go through the additional, just send it in. Give us an opportunity to approve in July what you are working on in July. It is such a little thing, but it will make a huge difference it'll make a huge difference to us. Okay.
There's just a caveat out there in the webinar that it's hard to get started any earlier until once those circuit breakers are known at July 31st.
That is, yes, that is fair. And so, so if we can double back to the calendar just for a moment, statutorily, the department has until July 31st to release those circuit breaker estimates. However, the field reps need those circuit breaker estimates before they can conduct their workshops. So internally, this becomes this becomes the department doing its best to practice what it is that we're preaching. Even though we have until the 31st, what we're looking at doing is having those circuit breaker estimates available and available and posted on our website as early as we can. So earlier when I said that June and July were spreadsheet heavy month, calculation heavy months for the department, this is what we're looking at doing. Although we could wait to the end, once we have, with few exceptions, we have the information we need to begin to release those estimates. If the circuit breaker estimates aren't ready until July 31st, I have done something wrong. I myself have done something wrong. I would say it is, take it to the bank. Guaranteed to have them before July 15th, even if that means I got to work a couple of weekends to make that happen. But they will be earlier. They will be available earlier than they have been in the past. It's the only way. But by releasing information earlier is the only way that we can with a straight face expect you to make those same sort of considerations, if possible, going through the process sooner. Okay. So number 2 for additional appropriations. So last fall we released an updated state form for the additional appropriations themselves. It looks very similar. It acts very similar to the one in the past, but one of the key differences is this section 3 that allows us to return to you the additional appropriations electronically, which again, selfishly, from the department's perspective, cuts down on some of the back and forth. Anytime I have to tell someone that the additional appropriation is in the mail, we mailed it to you, it should be there 10 to 15 days. This cuts down the amount of time that you spend waiting to find out whether or not it was approved or denied. What the request here is that if you're not using the most recent form that would have been distributed earlier this year, the one that's posted out on our website, we'd ask that you make that transition to using that form, and if possible, give us the ability to respond to your requests electronically as compared to over the course of snail mail. Okay. At some point, I am going to have to turn off that old form, in which case we'd be returning additional appropriations that are otherwise completed and completed correctly, which is only going to serve to slow you down on your end and slow us down on our end. This is just, if we were to draw a line in the sand today and say that additional appropriations going forward we know are coming in on those new forms, that would absolutely suffice. Now, the last issue that we see with additional appropriations relate to line 5 and line 8 on that form, or in this case the miscellaneous revenue and the circuit breaker figure which relate to the miscellaneous revenue that's being reported and the circuit breaker figure that's being used on the additional appropriation itself. So if we picture the additional appropriation, it's that final line, that line 17, that ultimately determines whether or not there's enough money to justify the approval. That's the number we need to know in order to determine whether or not we're going to approve it or deny it. With respect to line 5 and line 8, if the value that's on the additional appropriation itself is incorrect, we will scratch it out, replace it with the value that it should be, and use that to adjust the line 17 amount. So the number of times so far this year, even someone has submitted an additional appropriation that showed they had an extra $1 million on the form that they submitted to us, but it failed to account for the circuit breaker figure it overestimated the miscellaneous revenue figure. And once we adjusted those two, the $1 million that was there a moment ago is now a negative figure. So we end up denying an additional appropriation, even though the document that was submitted to us showed that the money was there. Now, does that mean that from an additional appropriation standpoint, you can't revise your miscellaneous revenue that you estimated significantly early in the process? Absolutely not. It just means that if your additional appropriation is based on a revenue figure that is different than the one that was ultimately used to certify the budget, we're just requesting an updated Form 2. Just, there's more revenue, or where originally you estimated only $100 was coming in and $1 million came in, we just need to know that information. And so in addition to the additional appropriation, we would need that revised Form 2 showing those new revenue figures. So you can absolutely change it. Just know that if you're changing the figure that you originally used, that new form would need to accompany your additional appropriation request. A circuit breaker works the same way. So now that the department has released the actual circuit breaker figures, those are the numbers that we would expect that you use during your additional appropriation request. What we're seeing on the screen now is a link to where we have those figures posted by fund to see the impact of the circuit breaker. Those are the numbers we're expecting to see on the additional appropriation form itself. If the two don't match, we will make the update to the form itself. And if that pushes the line 17 amount, if that pushes the actual balance below what it is you're requesting, it could ultimately lead to a denial on our end. Okay. All right. So that went longer than I meant for it to go. Before I transition to Ryan, who will take us through much more detailed analysis of the budgeting process, are there any questions from me? Going once? Twice sold. Okay. Thank you very much. If I'm sticking around until this is over. So if we've got more questions, or if you want to talk afterwards, we can do that. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Ryan Burke.
Do we have 5 minutes for a break? All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I know that's kind of a short break. If you need to use the restroom, it's down the hall. It'll probably go a little longer than 5 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes. No, about 10 minutes, right? All right, 10 minutes. We'll come back at...
I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and help teach you guys about the budgeting process, because I'm in the unique position because I get to work budgets probably 200 times every single year. This is my 8th year doing it, so I get lots and lots and lots of practice. I'm sure most of you do it about once a year. So my goal today is to just really help you understand the budgeting process and help you avoid some surprises that can definitely happen. And we see each year, but I want that to not be you. And if you have any questions throughout this presentation, raise your hand, just ask it. I find things work a little better in kind of informal workshop type session. So any questions all you have, if I say something you don't know what it means, definitely let me know. But there are 7 main things that I want you to really take away from this meeting. And what this will ultimately do is help you maintain local control of your library's finances. So let's say if you're a brand new official and you didn't have these resources, you would do the best you can with what you have. But that may mean that you adopt budgets that aren't funded, or you adopt over what you can have. And that's where the DLGF's role really comes into play, about making sure your budgets are funded. And then we'll cut your budgets and your levies down to the max funded and within that max amount. And that's what we want to avoid doing. We want you guys to maintain local control. All right? And there's 7 main things that will help with that. One is by understanding the individual steps of the budgeting process, the effects of property tax caps or cert breakers on your budget, the flow of data from one form to another in Gateway, because there's quite a few forms there, and if this is just your first time doing it, it can be challenging. I remember my first year, I was able to get my way through it, but it's definitely challenging the first time. Also understanding the purpose of each form. Sure, yeah, I go in here and I click these buttons because that's what I'm told to do, but what does it actually mean? how to proactively prevent budget cuts from the DLGF, where to find assistance with your budget forms, and lastly, once you do get that 1782 notice saying we've worked your budget, here's your preliminary figures, what do you do with that? So there are 4 main points that can really help you maintain local control. One would be that libraries have the option to use our max levy estimates to aid in adopting property tax levies that are within their maximum amount. So typically, if you follow the proper procedures and you're within your max levy, we're not going to reduce it. Another option you have would be adopting fundable budgets. Essentially, especially if you come to budget workshops, we'll be able to work through this information for you and help you have a good idea of, okay, this is the budget you brought to us, this is fully funded with this much extra, or we're short this much. Here are some of our options that we can do. Fred kind of alluded to this, but earlier meeting dates. Selfishly, that helps us meet our earlier deadline, but they can also help you as well. Because if there's ever a mistake made in the budgeting process, sometimes the only remedy is to restart the process. So that can take a couple weeks. So really the best thing to do is adopt a little earlier and allow yourself time to re-adopt if something should ever happen. Because you can plan very, very well, but let's say if you don't have a quorum of board members, a majority there, because they're sick or something happens, something beyond your control, adopting earlier will give you that chance to restart that process. Then the library won't be penalized. And fourth, very specific to libraries, you can pursue a non-binding review. I'm sure there's a couple libraries that are exceptions, but the majority of libraries have the option to adopt their own budget if they only grow their budget from last year to this year by the growth quotient. Last year it was 4%. This year it will be released by around July 2nd or so. Now, in order to calculate your maximum budget you can have and still adopt your own budget, what you can do is you can actually go to our website, county-specific information, and take a look at your budget order. In your budget order, there will be a total approved budget. That's what you're going to take and grow that by your growth quotient. Now, what you want to do is absolutely round down. So you do not want to be over that, not even by $1. What Wayne does there in the back is he'll take that round down, then he'll subtract $1 just to be safe. So you can definitely do that. And another thing we're going to do is, unfortunately, sometimes people have some difficulty calculating this, just because it can be a little challenging, especially when you only do it once a year. We fully plan on issuing a report very shortly, probably early July, that tells you exactly what your maximum budget is. If you're this number or lower, you can adopt your own budget. All right, so keep a lookout for that one. So by practicing these 4 main points, you can really maintain local control. Again, if your budget's funded, we're probably not going to cut it. If you're within your max levies, no real reason to reduce the levies that you adopted. And again, if you adopt early enough to restart the process, and you do make a mistake, we're not going to penalize you for that either. So what this does is this preserves the amounts adopted by you and your board. And that's really what we want, because you guys know your library a lot better than we do. And we want you guys to make local control of that. We want to just review it, make sure the procedures were followed, and pass on through.
There is a question, and the question from the webinar is that maximum budget with or without circuit breaker losses subtracted from the total?
That's a very, very good question, one that absolutely pertains to libraries. So let's say your approved budget is $1 million. That's what we certify. But property tax caps or circuit breakers is $100,000. So in your Form 1, you see $1.1 million. For the purpose of your maximum non-binding budget, you do not take into account circuit breakers. It's just your certified budget increased by the growth quotient, rounded down. Give or maybe subtract $1 to be safe. But anything you advertise or you adopt or you certify, that's going to be your net budget, not including circuit breakers. And we'll get into more of this later on. Very good question, though. So let's talk about property tax caps, circuit breakers, and what exactly they are, because I know we do have some new officials in the audience. So property tax caps are also called circuit breakers. Property in Indiana is capped at 1%, 2%, and 3%. 1% is typically for homesteads, 2% farmland, maybe rentals, and 3% for commercial or personal property. So if a taxpayer's is about to be billed higher than their cap liability, the bill is reduced to the cap. So unfortunately, I've got a couple units in some areas where there used to be quite a few factories, and they had a very, very large tax base. So homeowners there, let's say, paying 0.5%, $100,000 home, paying $500. But as the factories shut down and move away, the tax base really, really shrinks over time. So the pool of money that was getting paid to the county and distributed to the units, that really started shrinking. And when the county auditor or county collects less in property taxes, they're going to distribute less as well. So they pass on losses to you. Not really what you want, but that's how it works. So increased taxes, decreased assessed value, either combination of those can help to increase circuit breakers. And what we need to do is we need to account for these in our what we budget. So that's something that statute changed a few years ago. As far as gateway is concerned, there's no real changes, but as confusing as circuit breakers can be, I want to make sure everybody understands this. So let's put this in a scenario. Let's say there's a library and they've got $1 million levy. And there's two scenarios here. It's definitely oversimplified. But in the first one, they do not account for property tax caps, which are $300,000. The second one, they do. So in the first one, $1 million levy, they estimate circuit breaker is 0. Now at the DLGF, we will use any circuit breaker amount that you estimate. So if you put 0 on there, we may question, say, are you sure you want to use it? But if you say yes, we're going to. So in this case, they estimate they're going to get $1 million in property taxes. We're going to certify the budget based off that. So we certify a budget of $1 million, but unfortunately, the library may go throughout the year, and before the year's over, completely run out of money, may need to figuratively shut the doors for a while because they had no money to operate off of. So that's kind of the bad thing that can happen if you don't account for circuit breakers. Now let's assume that you do. $1 million budget, property tax cap losses of $300,000. You realize your net property tax revenue is only $700,000. So unfortunately it's a cut, but you see it up front. And you're able to adjust your budget then and there. You certify, or you adopt a budget of $700,000, that's what you certify, and you're not short anything. Okay? So there's no huge surprises later on down the road. Now let's talk about your budgets. Kind of like the question I alluded to before. You have net and you have gross. So it can be a little confusing. But on the internal forms, so your Form 1, your Form 4A, the Form 4B, forms that the public don't really see as often. Those will be your budget that you want to spend, let's say $1 million plus circuit breaker. So let's say $100,000. So the way this simply works is at budget workshops, you have your Form 1 completed already. You don't have to have that circuit breaker amount already entered in there. So your Form 1 at this time will say $1 million. You meet with me, you meet with Wayne, one of the other field reps, you say, okay, you're going to lose $100,000, let's account for it. You'll put this into your Form 1, 4A, and 4B. So what used to have $1 million in there will now have 1.1 million. Those are the inflated or gross budgets plus circuit breaker. Now on the more external forms that the taxpayers are more likely to see, the notice to taxpayers, Form 3, and Form 4, the resolution that you sign to adopt your budgets, those will only ever be the net budgets. Anything you advertise or adopt will be what you actually anticipate spending. So always double and triple check that. And what you'll do is you manually enter this information into Gateway, and Gateway will help make sure that the correct amounts are entered throughout. Now let's talk about the budget forms themselves. So this section will really help you understand the purpose of each form, the flow of data between the forms, and the proper order to complete them. Because Gateway is great. It's designed to make things a lot easier. But you really have to understand the process, the certain order to complete the forms to get the full effect. So this is what the budget form menu looks like probably right now. Nothing's submitted, everything's yellow, and a new official may think you work from top to bottom. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. That will create a lot of extra work for you. So let's go over how to actually complete the forms. So we've developed a flowchart, which is actually available in Gateway. It's not as pretty, but it gets the same point across. We have the current year financial worksheet, the debt worksheet, Form 1, 4A, and Form 2. Those are all what we refer to as the input forms. You're always going to want to do these forms first. Okay? And then all this information gets pulled into your Form 4B. From there, we calculate your levies and your tax rates. From there, we pull out the budgets and levies to what you advertise, and the budget levies and rates to what you adopt. So inputs, always do those first. That gets pulled into your Form 4B, which populates most of the form. You only need to calculate levies and rates from there, then pull it into what you advertise and what you adopt. And coming to budget workshops can be very, very helpful with this. So let's first talk about the inputs. The current year financial worksheet was historically known as the Line 2 worksheet. That's because the bulk of it goes to calculating Line 2 of your Form 4B. Remember, all these input forms are to help us complete most of the Form 4B for us. It shows a financial snapshot as of June 30th, and you need to do this for each of your funds. So there are 6 different lines of Form 4B that get calculated, but the 3 most common ones would be Line 2, which is your budget remaining to be spent the last 6 months of this year. Line 6, your June 30th cash balance, plus any investments. And line 7, property taxes to be collected in the last half of the year. That's simply just your December settlement. And this is what it looks like in Gateway. So all the different sections are a line of Form 4B that we're calculating. And again, make sure you complete this for each of your forms. This is one form that we can upload for you at budget workshops. And this is where you bring in your ledger or a fund report printed off from your software program, and we will actually verify every piece of information on here with you. And we can print off and give you a copy. Now let's talk about the debt worksheet. So first off, if you don't have any debt, you get to take about 45-second power nap. Now if you do, pay close attention. So if you anticipate having any new debt, that has to be closed on by December 31st. Okay? It needs to be closed on by December 31st and entered in Gateway, so that way we can give you money to repay it starting June of 2019. If it closes January 1st, I'm really sorry, but you're not going to get any money to repay it until June of 2020. So it's very important to plan this. And if you think you're going to incur new debt, definitely let your field rep know, because we're going to include that in your advertised and adopted budgets and property tax levies as well. Now the debt worksheet as a whole, essentially it allows you to tell us when you make your payments for 4 different time periods. You've got line 2, which is the last 6 months of this year, line 1, which is all of 2019, then 11A and 11B, first 6 months and last 6 months of 2020. Now, if you don't have any debt, you can skip the debt worksheet entirely. You won't even need to submit it. So that'll be the exception to the forms that you need to submit. This is what it looks like in Gateway. You'll click on the name of your debt, and it'll pull up an amortization schedule or payment schedule. You'll have your dates on the far left. In the middle, we have your payments. And on the far right, those will be 3 columns of checkboxes, 1 for each time period. And that's where you tell us when you make your payments. Although payment may say that it's due July 15th, it's pretty split halfway across the state that people actually pay those in June. So that does make a big difference. Mark this based off when you pay it, as opposed to the due date. Form 1 is next year's budget. It's the line item budget estimate, and it breaks down each fund's budget for 2019 into different line items. From there, those are divided into different expenditure categories, and each fund has its own Form 1, and there's 2 different columns, advertised and adopted. This data will be pulled into Form 4A by clicking a single button. But this is one thing that you're going to want to have done prior to budget workshops. Now, if for some reason you don't know about budget workshops until the morning of, and you think, oh crap, I definitely still come to budget workshops, and we may be able to help you with your maximum budget. And if you do want to pursue your max budget and it's just the general fund, we probably know what your budget's going to be. So always attend budget workshops if there's any possible way. But here, we can help you out a little bit.
There's a question in the online audience about fees for debt. I don't understand the question unless you mentioned fees for debt.
I don't think I mentioned it, but that's definitely something good to talk about. So with here, it's you click payments and tell us when you want to make them. There's also a fees debt where there are no boxes to click. Essentially, they're data entry fields. where you may have this bond or lease or loan. On top of that, you have, let's say, $500 trustee fees paid every 6 months. That's where you can manually enter $500 for line 2, $1,000 for line 1, so on and so forth. So you've got those as well. Good question. This is what the Form 1 looks like in Gateway. It's broken down by fund and department, but I haven't run into that many libraries that use departments for their funds. Furthermore, it's broken down by expenditure category. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. On the far right, it says property tax cap. That's where you'll enter that circuit breaker estimate, property tax cap estimate. All the line items have rolled over from last year. Typically, it was everything but capital outlays, but libraries typically have capital outlays every year. So those now roll over as well. So that was a nice improvement that I've noticed. But you simply enter your amounts and click Save. Now let's say you're walking away from budget workshops, your field rep said you have to enter $100,000 of losses here. You go to your Form 1, General Fund, click on Property Tax Cap, and that's where you enter your property tax cap losses that your field rep gave you. Now you're also welcome to use your own estimates as well. Now if you do use your own estimates, at least look at the 2018 actuals that are posted on our website and take a look at our 2019 estimates. And if you have any questions, use your field rep as a useful resource. Once it's entered on Form 1, this is your gross budget. Again, $1 million budget, now $1.1 million. This $1.1 million figure, the gross, will get pulled into Form 4A and Form 4B. But when you pull in your budget to Form 3, your advertisement, Form 4, your resolution, again, it will only be that net figure, that $1 million figure that you actually want to spend. Form 4A is simply a summary of Form 1. All you do is, once Form 1 is done, on the top right, click the button. That'll pull in all that information for you. Anytime you make an update to Form 1, maybe you forgot to put your salary there and you really want to get paid for some reason. You go in, you enter it in Form 1, and you go back into Form 4 and you click the button on the top right. Anytime you update Form 1 by revising it, or maybe you just copy amounts from advertised to adopted, go back into Form 4A and click the button on the top right. Essentially, that's the only thing you should be clicking on this form besides signing it once you're done. Revenue estimates. These are entered on your Form 2. This would account for all revenues besides property taxes. And there's two different columns here. So it looks very, very similar to Form 1. You do it for every fund that you have. There's different revenue categories. But more than likely, the first column and the second column won't be the same. That's because they're for two different time periods. The first column is for the last 6 months of this year. The last column is for all 12 months of 2019. Now, when you come to budget workshops, we can help you with a lot of these estimates, but there are definitely some revenues that we would have no idea about. So the ones that we can help you with would be typically those from the county auditor: excise, CVET, FIT, income taxes. But one thing that we can't help you with too much would be your copy fees, your fines. So bring in those revenue estimates, and we can help include those in our program and upload those into Gateway for you. Again, budget workshops are very, very helpful. So now we've already completed all those input forms. Let's work on Form 4B, where we actually do the calculations. This is also known as the fund report or the 16-line statement, even though there's 17 or 21 different lines, depending on how you count it. But essentially, it shows a financial snapshot for an 18-month period, last 6 months of this year and all 12 months of 2019. And it's divided into two columns: advertised and adopted. Advertised is essentially what you prepare, the budget, levies, and rates. And adopted reflects the budget, levies, and rates as approved by the fiscal body. Again, this will typically be the library board, but sometimes it may be your adopting body if you exceed the AVGQ in your growth in your budget, or you're just one of those few libraries where you're always adopted by somebody else. And essentially, Form 4B really is the heart of the budgeting process. Sounds a little corny, but I'm hoping that this helps you really remember this. Because again, it's very easy to come to budget workshops, collect the information, upload it in Gateway, and get through the budgeting process pretty easily. But understanding it can really, really help. Help you explain this to your board members, help you avoid mistakes, and that's really what I want to get across today. So data is entered into the input forms. and carried into the first two sections of Form 4B. There's only 3 of them. Then on Form 4B itself, the levies and the rates are calculated, and those are pumped out to Form 3 and Form 4 through advertisement and your adoption form. Now, understanding the Form 4B can really help you understand the financial status of any fund that you have. So the operating balance, line 11, I'm going to go over that a little later, but if you look at just that line alone, that'll give you a pretty good indicator of how healthy that fund is. We'll talk about that pretty shortly. Right now. All right, so this gives us a quick summary of the different lines of Form 4B. 1 through 5 are the expenses for the 18-month period. Again, last 6 months of this year and all of 2019. Lines 6 through 9 are the total revenues, besides property taxes for 2019 that we haven't calculated yet. You subtract those two and you get line 10, the amount that you have to raise in property taxes just to barely fully fund your budget. If this is ever negative, that's good. That means you're fully funded without property taxes. Line 11 is most important, so I'm going to save that one for last. Line 16 is your property tax levy, 17 is your tax rate, and what we added a few years ago was that cert breaker line. So at the very, very top, you've got your $1.1 million budget. At the bottom, you've got your $100,000 cert breaker. So when Gateway pulls this amount into Form 3 or Form 4, it subtracts the two. So always, always double check. Because if you enter the property tax cap in, let's say, a wrong category in Form 1, it won't pull through correctly. So make sure you enter those in the right fields, and then you manually check your forms as well. Now, line 11 really should kind of be towards the end, because that's the end result of everything above. What this is that's your estimated cash balance ending 2019. Also, beginning cash balance for 2020. It's the amount that you carry over to 2020 to help you operate off of. Because libraries are heavily funded by property taxes, and you have to operate off the cash on hand until the June settlement comes around. So that can be difficult sometimes. So having a reserve or an operating balance can really, really help with that. So if line 11 is ever positive, that means by the current estimates, you're fully funded. Now, if it's ever negative, the DLJF won't approve unfunded budget. So that's the amount of the cut that you're probably going to have, assuming nothing else changes. All right? So you can take a look at any library's Form 4B or any units across the state, look at the line 11, tell them that they're funded or not. I had a pretty large unit a long time ago where they had a negative $3 million line 11, and they were surprised when I had to cut the budget, unfortunately. So unfortunately, that happens statewide all the time. But understanding the Form 4B, understanding what it's telling you, can really help you see this up front and not be surprised. And that was the title of this presentation, Avoiding Surprises. So if you take only a couple things away from this, remember to check your line 11. Positive is good. Here's what the Form 4B looks like in Gateway. Lines 1 through 10 are all pulled in from the other forms, expenses and revenues. The one thing we haven't talked about yet would be the net assessed value on the top right. This needs to be a conservative estimate because essentially our goal here is to use an assessed value that's lower than the actual one. Now, the reason for this is that's what we use to calculate your tax rate. When I work the budget, I have to use the lowest number between the property tax levy and the levy that the adopted rate generates. And this really comes down to assessed value. What we typically do for assessed value is we take this year's 2018's and multiply it by 85%. That's usually pretty conservative. Now, that will increase the rate that you adopt, but it's pretty helpful. And the reason for that is if it wasn't, you could be missing out on some property tax revenue that you could have otherwise gotten. Now, county auditors certify the assessed values, or they're due to certify by August 1st. So if they do certify by August 1st, some people would say, okay, I'm going to use that, it's certified. I would not recommend that. Another scenario is I had a large city that did exactly that. They used what the county auditor submitted in Gateway and adopted the rates that were calculated in the levies. And when I was working the budget, they were going to lose about $400,000 because what happened is assessed values are very, very complicated. Corrections can come all the time. There's other things of that nature. and they had to go in and they had to correct things, which happens all the time, every year, several times a year, statewide. So no matter what information you have, I would not recommend using these certified values. I would still try to be conservative with this, just to be safe. Any questions? Okay.
You said the date was set in August?
So it's, by statute, it's due August 1st. They're not always submitted by August 1st, but that's when they're due. This is the last portion of Form 4B. This is where you calculate your levies and your rates. For most libraries, you'll have an option to use a gateway calculator. You use it, and you enter one piece of information, and it'll calculate all the others. So line 16, enter levy. That's one option. You plug in your max levy there for the general fund, hit calculate, and it calculates all the other figures for you. The one exception would be those counties that are low at levy freeze. Morgan, Wabash, and there's definitely a handful of other ones. Definitely reach out to a field rep so you know what those amounts are to be safe. That would be put on line 13B. But this will calculate all the other fields besides line 13B. The very bottom line is your property tax caps or circuit breakers. This is what gets subtracted from your line 1, your budget, when you go to advertise or adopt. Now let's take a look at the outputs. You have your advertisement and your adoption resolution. Form 3 is the official advertisement, and this is done by submitting your Form 3 in Gateway at least 10 days before your public hearing. This is what really sets the maximum budget levies that you can have for your unit, because you can always lower it, we can always lower it, but you can't go above without re-advertising. And again, that's assuming you have the time. So you have to submit your Form 3 at least 10 days before your public hearing. And there has to be at least 10 days between the public hearing and the adoption meeting. Now, sometimes it can be tricky to count out in 10 days, especially when it spans 2 months. So most people just use 2 weeks or 11 days. That's usually safest. And the final day to adopt is November 1st. Now, if you adopt November 1st and there's a mistake, there's no time to go back and correct it. So please try to adopt earlier if you can. But if not, November 1st is the final day in statute. Now let's review the information that's required to be advertised. There's the date, time, and address of the public hearing and the adoption meeting. The DLGIF will populate the following two: the max levy estimates and circuit breaker estimates. Then for any fund that you want to spend money out of or raise taxes for 2019, it will need to be listed in this bottom section. You'll need the fund name, the budget, the levy, any excess levy appeals, which are very, very rare, but they do occur occasionally, and Gateway will populate the current fund levy. So this is really good for taxpayers and yourself, because you have the levies you've entered for each fund, really just the general fund, maybe debt. You've got the current year levy, 2018's, and you've got a max levy. So definitely check these figures, because again, as soon as you hit submit, these are advertised, and that sets the max amount that you can have. Sorry. Now, one other thing that we're going to ask you on the Form 3 is if the territory of your library is changing. Maybe you're kind of bound by a city and that city did an annexation, or the library is just expanding its territory. We will ask you to indicate that when you complete the Form 3 or at budget workshops. The whole purpose for that is as soon as you click submit, it's available at budgetnotices.in.gov. And people can search by county or by address. County, not going to make a difference. If somebody types in their address, they may at one point in time not been in your library district. But now that the boundaries are changing, they'll see a separate table that says the ones above you definitely pertain to your address. These have their boundaries changed and may or may not apply to you. So that way taxpayers know for a fact, or at least are presented with all those that may pertain to them. Just to be safe.
We're going to go back a little bit when you're talking about the notice to the taxpayers, about the 7 days, within 7 days of the public hearing for the objection. Is that that business days? Or is
No,
it not? It's not.
Those are calendar days, and I will get to
Calendar
that one, I
days.
believe, next or one after that. But yes, those are calendar days. So if the public hearing is on the 10th, they have until the 17th. So this is what the Form 3 looks like in Gateway. The first half of it is really just telling them when and where the public and adoption meetings are, along with some estimates. Now at the bottom of this top section, there's a special notes field. A lot of people don't use that, but it's a great opportunity for you to really advertise anything else you want to. So maybe they need special assistance, maybe you're providing candy and cake, whatever. Try to get people to come. But anything you want to, you can type into the special notes section. Now in the bottom portion, that's where all the funds are listed. Budgets, levies, excessive levy repeals, which again are rare, and the current tax levy. So there you can see the growth between what you actually have for this year and what you're planning for next year. So it's very important to take a look at that. Now, this is very important, and it very, very rarely happens. But it happened to one of my units last year. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. 10 or more taxpayers can file an objecting petition within 7 days, now those are calendar days, not business days, of the public hearing. If there are any objections, the fiscal body of the political subdivision, essentially your library board in most cases, must adopt with its budget a finding concerning the objections in the petition and any testimony presented at the adoption hearing. These findings would then be uploaded through Gateway along with your signed Form 4. So if 10 or more taxpayers file a formal petition against the library, you have to address that when you adopt your budgets. You don't have to necessarily change anything, but you have to adopt with your budget a finding concerning the petition and any testimony presented. Now, this very rarely happens, and it's very easy to forget what I just said. So if this ever does happen, contact your field rep immediately, and we can help make sure that you do what you need to do. Okay? We're here to help. Now, let's say you did the Form 3 all by yourself, or you came to budget workshops and we uploaded it for you. Your first step would be to review the Form 3, your notice to taxpayers. Once things are confirmed to look good, at the very bottom you'll see a ready to submit bar with a little checkbox. Check it, then go back to the budget form menu, and this is where you might want to run your error prevention report. We'll get to that in a couple of slides. But you'll see a green button that says click to submit to DLGF. Click it, it'll ask you if you're sure, click OK, and then it will appear green. This is the first form you submit, and really the only form you submit before you adopt. But once it turns green, you are advertised. Make sure this is done at least 10 days before your public hearing, at least. Now, as soon as you click submit on Form 3, it's immediately available at budgetnotices.in.gov. Again, taxpayers can search for your notices by address or by county, and taxpayers can even subscribe to automatically be emailed notices as they're submitted. So as soon as you click submit, you may be sending a half dozen emails yourself, if not more. Now that's automatically taken care of by Gateway. You don't need to worry about that. Now let's talk about the error prevention report. Gateway is great, but errors sometimes do happen. Yes?
Before we go into that,
Yeah.
What about, along with Form 3, what about providing the link on our website to, are we still supposed to be doing that?
I'm not aware of any statutory requirement for that, but you're absolutely welcome to. So you can provide a link to your website to budgetnotices.in.gov. You can post the actual advertisement itself as a link in your website. Either of those would be great for transparency, but I do not believe those are required by statute.
Karen, hasn't it been in years past that that's
We've been told that that was statutorily required, so let me check on that, and I will put out that answer to the director's list.
Perfect. And it's really, really good to ask these questions because there may be some statutory requirements outside of our scope of work, some that we don't verify. So it's really good to ask these because Karen's going to confirm this just to be safe. But I can tell you that's nothing that I verify, but something you want to make sure that you comply with if it's statute. Thank you for the very good question.
You know, after being here 15 years,
Absolutely. All right, so the error prevention report. It's available at the very top of the budget form menu. You can click on error prevention report. And what this does is this compares data entered in Gateway. So your cash balance on your current year financial worksheet should always be the same as your cash balance on your Form 4B. No real exceptions to that. And this is exactly a good example of what Gateway will check for. Two amounts that should be the same that aren't, and would kick back an error. This is also very, very helpful for checking these property tax caps, your net and gross budgets. Because what it will do is it'll compare your budget entered on Form 1 to your budget entered on Form 4A, 4B, 3, and 4. So that way, if there are any discrepancies, it will take that into account and really give you a report with specific amounts that don't match, so that you can go in and make a correction. But one thing to keep in mind is if there's a typo entered, your cash balance is $100,000, you entered $1 billion, and you did that consistently across all the forms, that's not something that report will catch. So it's still important to verify this manually as well.
Well, I've gotten the answer already from out there in the webinar that it is statutory requirement, and that statute is IC 5-14-3.7, and that's the political subdivision shall prominently display on the main internet website page of the political subdivision's internet website the link provided by the department to the Indiana Transparency internet website.
So that may be a new addition for our PowerPoint for next year. So thank you very much. So with the error prevention report, once you access it, there will be a list that details every error, and you'll see one fund affected. So it'll give you a quick summary of the error, a full detailed description of the error. If you click on the button on the far right, it'll compare the two amounts. So in this case, I believe it's your line 2, which is essentially your budget remaining for the last 6 months of this year. Here they've got $1.5 million on the current year financial worksheet. Form 4B is $1.9 million. So maybe you made a correction somewhere, but you didn't pull it through to Form 4B. But this allows you to say, okay, this one's right, this one's not, let me go fix it in the other place. Now, always be sure to run this report before you advertise, which is submitting your Form 3, before you print off your Form 4, which is your adoption resolution, and before you submit the budgets. One thing to keep in mind is that although you may have everything done before you advertise, once you click submit and you clear all the errors and you click submit on the Form 3, it'll then start checking for new errors. Errors pertaining to the adopted column and a couple others. So once you do advertise your Form 3 and hold your public hearing, you'll likely have a better idea of what adopted figures you'll be pursuing. So the next step is to populate the adopted columns of Form 1, 4A, and 4B. Now buttons on the top right of Form 1 and 4B will help you copy all advertised amounts for all funds to the adopted column. Now if some amounts are changing, you can copy everything over and then manually change those few amounts that do. If everything is changing, we don't have any type of tool to automatically predict that, so you have to just manually enter the adopted column and click save and carry it through just like you did the first time. Now once Form 1 is completed, be sure to re-pull that data into Form 4A. Again, anytime you change Form 1, go to 4A and click the button on the top right. Then the adopted column of Form 4B will automatically populate the budget, levies, and rates under Form 4. So always double and triple check your Form 4. These are amounts that you adopt. But if there's a mistake, you can't change it on Form 4. You have to go back to Form 4B and change it in that adopted column. Now that being said, if your budget is showing as your gross budget, the issue is probably with that very bottom field that says property tax caps or cert breakers. But if you have any questions, you can always contact our Gateway support team or your field rep, and we'd be happy to help diagnose and walk you through what the issue is in Gateway. Now, once the adopted column of Form 4B is done, you're ready to move on to your Form 4, your adoption resolution. Now, this is used to formally adopt the budgets, levies, and rates for your library. The fiscal body adopts the Form 4, and the budget, levies, and rates must be listed for all funds. Otherwise, it's assumed it's zero. Again, the net budgets without the added property tax caps is what should be always adopted. Okay? If it's not, you'll need to go back in and make a change. This is what the Form 4 looks like in Gateway. In the middle, it has all the funds, the budgets, levies, and rates, and then all the board members. In this case, they all checked aye, they all approved the budgets, and they all signed. You have to check the box and sign. Otherwise, we cannot count the vote. And you need a majority or a quorum of the board there and voting for the budget to approve it. Now, if you have a quorum there, a majority of your board, but they can't quite finalize the amounts, they're making some changes they don't quite know, you can continue the meeting. But no matter what, do not adjourn the meeting. So on the top right is the date of adoption. This should always match the Form 3. Notice taxpayers when you told them that you were going to adopt. The only kind of exception would be if you're continuing the meeting, because this should be the date the form is signed. So you meet on September 20th, and they can't quite figure it out. You, in your meeting minutes, continue the meeting to a specific time, place, and location, or time, date, and location, and do not adjourn the meeting. Do not close the meeting. Then reopen the meeting on, let's say, the 25th. They all sign and adopt the budgets. Now, if these two dates ever don't match, the adoption date on Form 3 and the Form 4, your field rep will be asking for a copy of your minutes. So make sure you take good minutes that explicitly state this. Do not state the word close or adjourn. Now, there is an attestation line at the bottom of Form 4. It's entirely optional. You can use it if you want, but it's not required of libraries. And we do expect that the signed Form 4 to be uploaded in Gateway within 40 hours of adoption. Now, once you log into Gateway, you click on Budgets, click on your library. That's where it typically says the name of your library, or sorry, View Forms, Enter and Edit Budgets. Directly beneath that, it'll say Upload Signed Form 4 and Other Documents. This is exactly where you'll click to upload this form. The very top one says Form 4 by default, so nothing changed there. Enter a description such as Form 4, and this is where you need to scan and upload your signed Form 4. Now, there are libraries, so I'm sure you're very, very astute. So, but with that being said, let me give you a couple pointers, because anytime you scan something into your computer, the name of it's going to be kind of jumbled, just random gibberish. So some people think it's a great idea to just name it Form 4 and upload it. And that is a huge improvement because it helps you find your document and everything else. But you may want to go a step further of calling it maybe 2019 Form 4. Because if you're in this position 2 years or 42 years, you're going to have a lot of these building up. So make sure that you upload the correct one, hit upload file, do a song and dance for a couple of seconds, and the table will appear down below that says successfully upload files. There's a link to the file on the far left. Absolutely click it, because on the far right there's a delete option. We did not have that first year, and it was highly passionately recommended that we have one, because we have people uploading things that weren't Form 4s that they did not want to see. So absolutely verify what you're uploading, and if it's not it, click delete and re-upload. The last form we haven't talked about would be the 1782 Notice Recipients form. Kind of long-winded, sounds fancy, but it's really not. It's simply the names and email addresses of anybody you want to receive that 1782 notice. It's really easy to complete, simply because they all carry over from last year. But kind of your responsibility with this form is to make sure you're on this, your email's correct, anybody else you want to receive this is on it. Now, you may want to go a step further of including maybe a personal email address, because I know some people have some spam filters, or sometimes things just get misspelled and you don't quite catch it. So by having a work one and personal one, that'll just double your chances of making sure you absolutely get it. Because as soon as these are emailed out, the 10-day clock starts ticking down with how much time you have to respond. Unfortunately, it's not 10 days from when you receive it, it's 10 days from when it gets sent out. So it's very, very important that you receive this and have plenty of time to review it. Now, once you do get this, if you have any questions, contact your field rep. We are happy to help. Now, submitting on the budget forms. All the other budget forms will have a signature panel at the very, very bottom. Leigh Burke's my daughter. She's 3-year-old, and she loves libraries. So she has aspired to become a library director, and looks like this is from the future. She's become one. But she entered her name, her title, and her 4-digit PIN, and she couldn't quite figure out how to enter the date. But then she clicked sign date, and it automatically populated. So that took care of it. Mark the form as ready to submit. Once you've completed the form and you've verified it's all correct, then go back in and submit it. Now, if you don't recall your 4-digit PIN, email Gateway at dlgf.gov, and pretty quickly they'll give an email back to you stating what your 4-digit PIN is. Now going back to the budget form menu, you'll now see a green button that says click to submit to the DLGF, then that form will turn green. Do this with every form, so top to bottom, it should all be green, and you should do that within 40 hours of adopting your budgets. This is what it should look like when you're done, assuming you have a debt fund. If you don't, the debt worksheet may be yellow. Okay. Now let's talk about those binding review libraries. So maybe you're issuing a new debt this year, and you just have to go for binding review. Fine. Let's talk about what this process looks like. Essentially, it's the same process, except the tasks are split between you and the adopting body. So as library, going through binding review, you prepare the budget forms, and typically have those entered by September 1st. But here they give you until the 3rd or so, because once September 4th comes around, your editing rights get switched to read-only. And from there, it's in really the county auditor's hands, or maybe the city controller's hands, or whomever's adopting your budgets. Then with adopting unit, they're responsible for submitting Form 3, your notice to taxpayers, adopting the Form 4, and submitting the budget forms. Now, it's definitely good to have very, very good open communication with whoever is adopting your budget, because if they don't submit your Form 3 on time, and there's no time to restart the process, you get penalized and they get penalized. Nobody wants that to happen. So it's good just to have open communication saying, hey, my Form 3 is due tomorrow, I'm seeing it's not submitted yet. Do you mind taking care of that? That can save us a lot of headache. And by us, I mean everybody. Now, let me talk about one last thing with binding review. You have a couple different options. So if you're incurring a brand new debt, options may be limited. But let's say you just have a new expenditure this year. You have, well, even with the new debt, a couple options you have are you can, as soon as you exceed that budget, that non-binding max budget, where it's this year's budget plus the growth quotient, rounded down minus $1, you are going to be in binding review. Somebody's going to be adopting your budgets, your levies, and your rates. That's one option. Now, if you adopt within your maximum budget you can have, you get to adopt your budget, levies, and rates. And then later on, if you have to do an additional appropriation, that's the only part that would be subject to a binding review. So that's some option libraries pursue, or you may want to just get taken care of all at the same time. Option 1, you can adopt your budgets, property tax levies, and rates. And option 2, they do everything. So it's really your choice, but contact your field rep and we can help kind of remind you of those options and kind of the procedures that go along with both of them. Now let's talk about preparing for budget workshops, because again, these are very, very, very helpful. What it is it's a local one-on-one meeting with you and your budget field rep, me, Wayne, or whomever. And what you do is you bring all process financial information that we ask for, and we can work through the completion of several different budget forms and help discuss ways to achieve a funded budget that's within the max levies. Make sure your meetings are timely. So maybe you thought they were 10 days apart, but they're only 9. We can help point those out, and also help answer any budget questions that you may have. Now, we can upload the current year financial worksheet for you, Form 2, Form 3, which is your advertisement, and Form 4B's adopted column. So this is a majority of the forms done. And supposedly, you should have Form 1 done prior to budget workshops. So most of the forms by July 16th, by August 30th, whenever your budget workshop is, can mostly be done. Now, when you leave the budget workshop and you get an upload into Gateway, you'll also get a front and back checklist that'll walk you through everything you'll need to do step by step. So spend a couple hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes, depending on your library. You could be done with the entire process and just need to click submit and get a form signed. It's that easy in some cases. So budget workshops are a huge, huge help.
I do have a question about additional appropriations. The question is, once you do an additional appropriation, is the new amount what you use for the next year's total budget, or do you use the original total budget certified?
That's what I love about this group. Really, really good questions. And this is one that I didn't know until a couple years ago. It's based entirely off the total budget on the budget order. Additional appropriations, appropriation reductions, those do not affect that. Always take the budget on the budget order. Very, very good question. Yes?
I have a quick question. This happened last year when I did not affect. I would never miss the budget workshop like this. These are very, very valuable. But anyway, you take your estimated tax cap and you use it for all the figuring, and then they help you do your forms and get you a tax rate and all that, and it's great. But then you find out later your actual tax cap is quite a bit higher.
Okay.
So should you go back in your forms and should you keep what you have and then deal with it later, or should you go back and enter the actual tax cap you have because you haven't had your budget approved yet? I think so. Should you change that figure? That'll change everything in your budget.
Okay. So I think last year there was a small discrepancy for a couple of weeks where we may have been using the prior year's cert breakers actuals, and then we didn't get the estimates until, let's say, July 31st or so. This year we have Fred saying you can take it to the bank that we'll have it by February 15th, which makes me very happy. So that should not happen. Now, with that being said, that brings up another good question. So let's say we say your cert breaker losses are $100,000, but in April of the following year or March of the following year, it's actually $150,000, and your budget was just barely funded without anything left over. That's where it's very, very important to actually take a look at what your estimates were and compare that to what the actuals were. Because here you can see we're losing $50,000. Take a look at your operating balance. Again, I'm going to keep plugging it. Operating balance, line 11, Form 4B, very important. See if that can absorb that $50,000 loss. Otherwise, kind of on your own books, you may need to account for the fact that you won't be able to spend that $50,000 that we said that you could in the first place. So you'll need to adjust your budget accordingly if the cert breaker estimates you use are lower than the actual, and you don't have that buffer there in the operating balance. So, and again, any questions, contact your field rep.
Let me repeat that so that we get that correct. The question was that by one of the library directors is I do my budget form and I've put that property tax cap in there, but it's changed between the end of July and before I guess my budget workshop. What do I do? Do I go back in and change it? Or before I have my budget approved is when it changes. Do I go back into the gateway and make a change in that circuit breaker?
And the answer was that shouldn't happen again this year, because we have, thankfully, Fred saying that we will absolutely have circuit breaker by July 15th by the time budget workshops start the following day. So that won't be an issue this year. But if the circuit breaker amounts do change from your estimates that you submit to the actuals that are released in March or April, go back and compare the two. Because if your estimates were too low, you're not going to have as much money as you thought you would. So take that difference and subtract that from your operating balance on line 11. Make sure your budget or really funding can absorb that loss. The operating balance can absorb that loss. And if you have any questions, contact your field rep. We're happy to help.
And the next question is, and if so, what effect does it have on the following year's budget? Actually, the first question is it possible to offset circuit breakers with the rainy day fund?
So I am not aware of any way to really offset circuit breakers. Now, what you can do is, let's say you lose, your budget's not funded due to circuit breakers by $100,000. So this example I keep using. You could spend money out of rainy day. That's absolutely an option. But you can't automatically divert funds for cert breakers. Now, you lose money, you spend it elsewhere, you can absolutely do that. But you can't yourself reduce cert breakers except by adopting a lower levy. But then if you're already at cert breakers, somebody else is just going to get that money. A different unit's going to get that money, more than likely. So there's no real easy way to reduce your cert breakers. But if you lose money in one fund, such as general, you can typically spend money out of rainy day for a similar purpose.
All right, we have another question. Question on Form 4B, line 7, expected property taxes in December. What should we enter? Certified levy minus June distribution or certified levy minus June distribution minus circuit breaker losses? Okay,
so that one I'm happy to help explain. First off, come to budget workshops and we can give this to you. It's going to be on the bottom of that current year financial worksheet. If you'd like to know the answer yourself, what I would do is I'd pull up the circuit breaker report for actuals that we have posted on our website, and also take a look at your Form 22s. So for this case, let's say it's just the general fund. We had a $1 million certified levy, but you have a post circuit breaker abstract levy of $900,000. Now the way you get that one number is you have your, on the circuit breaker report, certified levy, abstract levy, total circuit breaker. Take that total circuit breaker number and subtract that from your abstract levy. That'll give you these two figures. Let's say $1 million and $900,000. From there, you subtract out your June property tax settlement. And let's just say you get $500,000, $400,000. We're going to use the lesser of. So with this, it can be complicated. Go to budget workshops, we can give this to you automatically, essentially. But if you want to know the full process, it's the lesser of certified levy minus June distribution, or on that circuit breaker report, abstract levy minus total circuit breaker minus June property tax distribution. Okay, lesser of. Good question. Yes.
I have a clarification on the last question you asked. So let's say that your board decides they want to lower their budget.
Mhm.
You said that that money will go to another taxing unit. You're just going to lose out on the money. Is that what you're saying?
All right.
Technically?
So by lowering your budget, do you mean lowering your actual permission to spend or your property tax levy?
Property tax levy.
Okay. So let's say you're really affected by circuit breakers.
Right.
Then in that case, you may still be hitting those circuit breaker caps. And essentially that is what happens in some cases. So if you try to reduce circuit breakers by reducing your own, overall circuit breakers may get reduced, but it is possible that they'll just get shifted around. But that varies so much across the state, it's hard to give a specific answer for one unit. But that is what can happen. Okay. Let's talk about preparing for budget workshops. We recommend you take a look at some historical data to help you kind of get started. So taking a look at 2018's Form 1 is a great starting point for 2019's Form 1. Maybe a couple of things changes, maybe things change by a couple of % across the board. That's great. But downloading your 2018 Form 1 into Excel and changing it from there can be a great start. Comparing your 2017 expenses to revenues is also a very, very good tool that I don't think everybody does, but it's a huge benefit because the DLGF will let you spend essentially everything you have, essentially down to the ground in some cases, unfortunately, but that's local control. So it's very, very important for you to see if your spending is sustainable because you may come into the position with a very large cash balance, but if that gets spent down, it can be really, really hard to kind of recoup that over the years. And that does happen sometimes across the state. But just taking a look, total 2017 expenses minus revenues. If revenues exceeds expenses, you're building a cash balance. Expenses exceed revenues, you're spending that down. And there are a variety of different reports, but we have some on our public site. We've got the budgets, which any taxpayer can go in and see. There's the annual financial report, which also contains these total expenses and total revenues. Remember, Gateway is divided by DLGF and SBOA. Now, because everybody here probably has a Gateway account, you can go into Gateway and simply on that select unit menu, change the year back to 2018. That's how you can view prior year's information. And for most units, you can go back all the way to 2012.
I have another question.
Sure.
Should we account for debt circuit breaker loss in the general fund?
Very good question. So on that circuit breaker report that we issue with the final actual values, you will see an amount for debt service. That's only the over 65 credit, but we do not acknowledge that for debt service, and you don't acknowledge that out of the general fund. So any amount that you see out of debt service that's just for your information only, you do not need to reflect that in Gateway. So one very, very important page of the DLGF is the county-specific information page. Log in Gateway, or not Gateway, go into your website, in.gov/DLGF. On the left-hand side, you'll see county-specific information, and click on your county. From there, you'll see budget orders for the past several years, our max levy estimates that we issue mid-July, property tax cap estimates, which by statute were issued by July 31st, but maybe a couple weeks earlier, the local income tax estimates, and also miscellaneous revenue estimates. So a lot of the stuff that pertains directly to you can be found by going to in.gov/DLGF and then county-specific information. We also have our memos and presentations page, which is where you can find exactly how to do an additional appropriation, information about excess levy appeals. You can also see various presentations we have and just other memos as well. Let's talk about what to bring to budget workshops. There are some that apply to everyone and others that don't, but here's the documentation that you should bring. A financial report or ledger for the first 6 months with your expenditures broken down by fund. So general fund has spent this much, rainy day this much, debt service this much, as of June 30th. Your June 30th cash balance, including investments for each fund. Confirm public hearing and adoption meeting dates, along with the times and locations of each meeting. Please remember you need a quorum here. So unfortunately, sometimes people take vacations and they don't plan those too well. So make sure that you will have a quorum at those meetings. Now, if you have an encumbrance, make sure you bring those. If you don't know what those are, they may not pertain to you. But what they are is you had your 2017 budget, and let's say in December you received a bill, and the board decided to carry that over to be paid in 2018. That's simply done by a resolution, or at least purchase order, but typically resolution. Bring any documentation you have for that encumbrance with you to budget workshop so we can count for it. You currently have your 2018 budget. You can do an additional appropriation to increase it, or you can do an appropriation reduction to decrease it. So if you've done any of those two things in the first 6 months, bring us that documentation. If you plan on either of those two things in the last 6 months, let us know. And lastly, for documentation, if you have debt, bring in your amortization schedules or lease payment schedules. Now, forms to bring to budget workshops. This would be Form 1, your line item budget estimate. Please try to have this done before budget workshops. If not, at least try to have the total budget amount. And we'll verify the maximum non-binding budget you can have. But hopefully we'll have that posted prior to budget workshops as well. Now, also, your completed Form 2 for each fund. Again, we can provide estimates for excise, CVET, FIT, and those lit certified shares. But copy fees, fines, those we don't have very good estimates for. So bring in those estimates and we can help you complete the Form 2 and upload that into Gateway for you. Now let's talk about the 1782 notice and budget certification. So adopting fundable budgets within the max levies can help prevent reductions. And really, by the time you walk away from budget workshops, you'll have a really good idea of what you're going to have certified, at least as far as budgets and levies are concerned. Now, once you do receive the 1782 notice, remember to review it very early to allow time for response. And the first page is a cover page. This has your due date on it, and it's what you use to respond saying, I want changes or I don't want changes. The next page is a 1782 notes page. Notes, very important. Take a look at this, because this will summarize all the changes we made. So your budget was reduced, your levy was reduced, or maybe you said that you were going to do an appropriation reduction. You were going to reduce this year's budget to better fund next year's. You told us that, but we were never given a resolution saying that. We had to remove it, but this is where you respond saying, please use the attached appropriation reduction, and we can help restore next year's budget. Another thing you want to do is compare the adopted budgets and levies on Form 4 to the fund report. There's line 1A, 1B, 1C. Looks a little confusing, but 1C is your actual approved budget. Compare that to what you adopted. Line 16 is your levy. Compare that to the levy you adopted. If you're adopting within the max levy and your budgets are funded, you shouldn't see much of a change, if any. And definitely return that cover page saying no changes requested, or if you are requesting changes, just a detailed response of what you would like changed. Then we'll take it into consideration and make those changes if we can. And again, if you have any questions throughout any of this, contact your field rep. Let's talk about budget certification. As Fred alluded to, we have 6 fewer weeks, and it's definitely going to be a challenge, but we're making quite a few changes. And one thing that we're hoping for is that as soon as budget workshops are done and assessed values are submitted by the county, we've been told that we should be able to start working budgets. So that could be as early as mid-August or September. which would be a huge, huge leg up for us, meeting our new deadline. So if there's any possible way that you can adopt earlier, please try to. If you can adopt October 31st, we typically adopt on November 1st, we'll take that. Anything earlier we'll definitely take. If you have to adopt later for this year, for whatever reason, that's fine. You have until November 1st, but if you can adopt earlier, that would be great. Now, the three main things you can do to really help us meeting our deadline would be attending budget workshops, because essentially we can help you complete most of the process while I'm giving you a checklist that walks you through the rest. So that makes it pretty hard to really forget a step and have to restart it, or just be completely surprised by something. Adopting and submitting your budgets earlier definitely helps, and adopting budgets that are funded and within the max levy can really, really help, because that decreases our hand in your budget. Again, we want you guys to maintain local control and really have the budgets that you guys advertise and adopt. The only kind of key points you need to do is understand the procedures to get this in Gateway, make sure that the budgets are funded and you're within that maximum allowed property tax levy. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Well, I do have a question.
Sure.
I can't verify, but I was understanding years ago that we used I think they meant average growth quotient. I don't know what SAGQ is. Against our approved levy, not our approved budget.
Okay. So with your max levy from last year, that gets increased by the AVGQ. So let's just say it's 4% again for this year. I've got no idea, but let's say it is. Your $1 million levy, max levy last year becomes $1,040,000 this year. It's a 4% increase. Now, with you being libraries, your maximum non-binding budget, that's just last year's certified plus the growth quotient. So the AVGQ has a role to play in your max levies and your max non-binding budget. So that's probably where that one came from. Mm-hmm. Now we have several resources available. So let's say you have to get your Form 3 submitted today and Saturday. Unfortunately, you may not get a hold of me unless I'm working budgets, which I may be. But you do have help available. So anytime you're in Gateway at the top, it says Home, About, Account Settings, and User Guides. If you click there, you'll see a user guide that will walk you through every single form that you have. We have these information icons scattered throughout the forms. So you're on your Form 4B, you see line 11, operating balance. I know Ryan told me this is really, really, really important, and I want to remember it, but I just don't. There's a blue icon next to it. Hover over it with your mouse, and it'll tell you exactly what that field means. We have YouTube training videos. I'm going to record one next week that's very, very similar to this one. We've got our memos. You can always email or call us. For Gateway support, email gateway@dlgf.gov. We've got a one-man team that has been absolutely great, and he will really help you answer how you get information in the Gateway. So you're trying to save something that's not working, he's your man. If it's what amounts do I enter, contact your field rep. We'll really help you with that. Anytime you do an additional appropriation, make sure you email that to additionalappropriationrequests@dlgf.gov. We also have a contact page and a field rep map. And if you're in any of my counties, my name is Ryan Burke, 317-719-3546. Here's my email address. But the link at the top will get you to a budget field rep map that will really help you understand who your field rep is. And if you don't know who they are, definitely reach out to us. So we can make sure you're getting the emails that we're sending out, you're invited to budget workshops, and also it just really helps to start the budget season as well. And anytime you have any questions, please let us know. I've always just referred to questions as job security. And so that's my job. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you. I just want to give a shout out to Tracy Stewart of Walkerton for giving me that code for the transparency information. We're going to